Hello, my family and I are preparing for another road trip, and I'm trying to get my gear ready for especially the front seat. I've talked to you about my get home bag that I keep in the trunk usually. I try to keep it where I can get to it in a hurry especially with the rifle that's in it. However, I want to talk about kind of the first level gear and some possible situations that some of these situations I've run into myself and had to deal with, and lessons I learned in the process and why I carry certain gear now within reach. So in my normal everyday, I always have something on my belt in my pockets. I always have a knife, always have a gun where legal. Always have some kind of medical of some kind. And I say that, but let me go ahead and share a story. Just a couple weeks ago, we were traveling not far from home, about 45 minutes from home, and I did have my gun on me. I had a pocket knife, but I did not have my medical gear. It was in my other vehicle, and just didn't want to transfer it to the van. I didn't have my belt medical on me like I should have, because I had put it on my hunting pack. So we're driving down the road. My wife's driving, and the two cars in front of us start swerving. And I'm thinking either that person is intoxicated, or they're on their phone, or they're falling asleep. Something's not right. So I was watching, and they swerved, overcorrected, and then went down into a ditch, and then popped up. They hit the culvert and popped up into the air. The car almost went airborne. And then they lost control, went off into a little grassy field area, swerving. It was evident they were trying to stop, but it was really muddy, so they kind of skidded into a tree. And they kind of slowed upon impact, but the airbags definitely deployed. So I told my wife, as a pull over, we've got to check on these folks. And so I told my wife, I said, just go ahead and call 911. I mean, that impact was hard enough. There definitely could be injuries or even death. And so my wife's on the phone, and I run over there. And I say run. I'm trying to assess the situation as I get up to the car, and the airbags are definitely deployed. And I look at the front hood, and it's crumpled up a little from the tree, and there's a little bit of smoke coming out. And then in my mind, I'm like, oh no, why didn't I bring a fire extinguisher? And I'm thinking, I have one in my Suburban, but I don't have one in the van we're traveling in, or at least that's what I was thinking. I do have one in the trunk of the van, but in that moment, I'm kind of scrambling, like, oh no, I can't put out a fire. There's too much vegetation around here. This could be really bad in a hurry. So I walk up to the driver window. I carefully open the door, and the airbag was deflating, and the lady was definitely in a daze. I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, I don't know what's going on. I think I fell asleep. And I said, well, how many people are in the car with you? And she says, just my daughter. And I could hear sounds from the passenger side. And so I said, well, ma'am, I said, I'm a little concerned about your engine is smoking. If you are able to move, maybe we can get you out of the vehicle. If you're not able to move, tell me now. Because I'm thinking, what is the priority here? Get her away from the vehicle, or try to figure out how to put this fire out? But I'm also, in my mind, approaching the scene. There's shattered glass everywhere. I'm like, if this lady is cut anywhere, we got to stop the bleeding. So kind of assessing the situation. She seems fine. She starts getting out on her own. I let her take my hand and helped her to kind of step out of the vehicle. She was mostly just dazed and bruised from the airbag deploying, honestly. And so I got her at least out of the vehicle, and she said, please go help my daughter. So I ran around to the other side of the vehicle. It was kind of hard to, because there was a big briar patch up against the vehicle. And the daughter was in there. She was probably 13 or 14. And she was crying, just dazed, didn't know what was going on. But she kept saying, my leg, my leg. and so I was able to open the vehicle up. And she had evidently, the airbag deploying, or maybe it was just the impact. She had her seatbelt on, thank the Lord. But she had pinched her leg up under the dash, and it may have been broken the way she was acting. I'm assuming it was broken. But she was getting panicky, and when the mother got on the other side and saw the smoke coming out, she got panicky. She's like, get my daughter out, get my daughter out. And the daughter was having trouble finding the seatbelt. Well, and here I am, trying to assess the situation, and I said, can you move? Do you think you're able to get out? And she just starts crying, get me out, get me out. And I know you have to be very careful with accident victims, and you're concerned about spinal injuries and all that. But I'm starting to panic too. All right. I'm having this kind of adrenaline rush going in the moment. Like, okay, is the car about to explode? This girl wants out. Can I help her out? She's not complaining about her back. She's complaining about her leg. All right, I'm going to make the decision to help her get out of the vehicle. And in that moment, I'm thinking, it would be so nice if I had a tool to cut the seatbelt. And I had a pocket knife, but then I'm thinking, this girl is kind of traumatized right now. She does not need to see me walking up to her window or up to her with an open blade. So I decided to keep that knife in my pocket. And so I said, can I help unbuckle you? Just get me out, just get me out. So I was able, I'm pretty sure I'm the one that unbuckled her. I reached around her, unbuckled her, and I said, can you take my arm? I had to push the airbag out of the way, and she grabbed onto my arm. I said, all right, hop out and onto your good leg, and we're going to try to get away from the vehicle and up onto the road where your mother's at. And at that time, another person had stopped, and he came around the vehicle, and he helped clear some of the brush out of the way, and we both got on either side of the young lady, and we helped her to kind of hop out, carried her out to the road and sat her down. And the smoke from the vehicle, from what I could tell, there was no open flame. So, I mean, it kind of dissipated. May have been some from the airbag deploying, not sure. It looked like actual smoke coming out from under the hood, not just mist from the airbag. So anyways, we sat there with them, I had to call 911 again, and we were literally a half mile away from the county police station, half mile away. And I'm sure there were multiple calls that went in because it was a pretty crowded intersection there. But I called and talked to the dispatcher and said, we definitely need medical here. We have a young lady who has an injury, possibly a broken leg, definitely traumatized. And they said, well, we're trying to locate you. And I gave them more, I guess, precise location. And it still took them from the moment of the first call, close to 15 minutes before first emergency response was officially on scene. Now, I share that with you not to throw mud at the local, police or fire or EMS. They're doing their best, and when they got there, they secured the scene. I talked with the first officer who was on scene and made sure he gave me the green light to leave. I didn't have to fill out any incident reports or anything like that. I share that for the record of this video. And, under this circumstance, I didn't try to apply medical aid or anything like that. So, I mean, I was kind of covered under Good Samaritan law and all that I did. But going back to the timing, when it comes down, if one of them had been lacerated, and bleeding out, I would have been the only thing standing between them and death. If that car had truly been on fire and flames and was, possible fuel line leak and all that kind of stuff, me being there would have been, the only thing between them and between life and death, because they weren't getting out necessarily on their own power and in the speed that they needed to get out. As it turns out, they probably could have stayed in the car. There was a little bit of panic. I hope I didn't increase that panic. I was trying to remain calm, especially externally. But, things could have been a whole lot worse. And in hindsight, there were some things I wish I would have had. First of all, a fire extinguisher, at least to be able to carry with me. And second off, some kind of cutting tool that wasn't a 4-inch plus blade knife. So, with all that in mind, I have changed a little bit of the gear that I have, at least in my front seat, in case drive up on another circumstance like that. Am I always going to pull over if I see an accident? In that environment, as I told my wife when I got out of the car, I was like, someone over there could be dying or dead, and I need to go help. That's especially watching the impact. If someone gets a flat tire and they're pulling off on the side of the road, and most folks have AAA, unless it's I look at the driver and can tell it's some little old lady who definitely needs some help. If it's an able-bodied person, I'm probably just going to wave at them and keep on going, So, there is kind of the environmental factors of should you stop, should you not stop. I'm glad I stopped in this situation. It was definitely a learning experience for me. And I was able, before I left the scene, and after the EMS guys checked out the mother and daughter, I got his permission. I said, can I speak to them for just a minute? He said, yeah. And so I knelt down with them and just said, hey, I'm a pastor. Can I pray with you? And they seemed to be grateful, and they were definitely still in shock, but I just said a quick prayer for them and told them, I wish them the best and that we would continue praying for them, and left. But, I keep running these rabbit trails. As far as gear that I now carry with me, and within easy access, will include a fire extinguisher within reach of the driver, or easy access in a trunk, definitely. And then a little piece of equipment that I picked up on sale during Christmas was this SOG trauma shears. And the reason I'm going with this, that packs up kind of nice in a folded configuration, but it does have a seatbelt cutter. Also, you can easily cut through a seatbelt with the shears itself. Definitely has other tools on it, little screwdrivers and bottle opener, so it's like a mini multi-tool in a sense. But again, this is not as threatening as me pulling out a pocket knife or my belt knife. And this is something that would come in handy for other things besides cutting through seatbelts. I'm definitely capable, but so this is going to be in my regular, probably on my belt, in my personal trauma kit. And I'm going to start carrying my trauma kit, definitely, and have other kits for my other endeavors. Let's see. Another thing I wish I would have had with me were gloves. There was no blood. I'm glad there was no blood, that I didn't have to get other people's blood on my hands to help them. But in hindsight, especially grabbing briars, grabbing broken glass to kind of get that cleared out to help get the girl out, I wish I would have had at least a pair of leather gloves. And you know what? I don't have them with me right now. They're in my other bag. I got to get situated. Now, in my big personal trauma kit, I've got medical grade gloves, and especially dealing with an open wound, I would try to slip those on quickly, because you don't know what blood-borne diseases people carry, and you don't want to expose yourself to those kinds of diseases. There's a reason medical professionals wear those gloves. So I definitely have some in my big trauma kit here. But as far as, helping someone get out of a wrecked vehicle, having some kind of a leather protective glove for your hands. And usually I have mechanics wear gloves that are easy access in some of my other bags. Something else to consider would be signaling And I did have this in the van. I always do. It's just an orange safety vest. Um, Picked it up years ago on a clearance rack at Walmart in the hunting section. And I keep it there mostly in case I'm dealing with a flat tire on the side of the road, on the highway. Want to be very visible so I can slip that on over whatever I'm wearing. Because usually when I'm dressing my everyday, I tend to, do earth tones and low visibility, but that's not a good thing when you're on the side of the road. So definitely have that. Something else to consider is having space blanket of some kind. Of this is like a space blanket sleeping bag, but I do have other just basic space blankets. If it wasn't cold that day, but if it had been, and those two ladies were sitting there and traumatized at the side of the road, say below freezing temps, they could have started going into shock. In fact, they were shaking from like mental shock. But if it had been cold, it could have gotten, much worse in a hurry, especially if they're like sitting in snow or something. So, having some disposable, space blankets available to, and let's say one of them were trapped in the vehicle and it's 20, 30 minutes before a, fire EMS rescue crew shows up, me getting there and getting a space blanket on them, to kind of help keep them warm, and their body regulating, that would be important. And then there's also this other sad reality. And I was thinking this in the back of my brain. If I walk up to this door and this, driver's deceased, what do I do? And playing it back out. If I had walked up to the door and the mother was deceased, and the daughter is over there freaking out, how do I help in that situation? We're sitting there waiting and the mother, is exposed and all that, having something to cover the body and just, help keep the daughter from looking, that might be an important consideration, and vice versa, of course. And these are things I know that first responders deal with on a daily basis. And I just also want to go ahead and say I'm not a trained, licensed first responder. I'm a concerned citizen with basic first aid and CPR certification. I've done that course multiple times with firemen and EMTs at different locations, but I don't have an EMT certification. So, anything that I'm doing, anything that I'm even encouraging viewers to consider doing, is hopefully under Good Samaritan law, is something that, you would do, and you would do to the level of your training, in trying to help preserve life, until professionals arrive on the scene. So, of course, in my big trauma kit that I also wish I would have had with me, I do have CPR mask in here, that I'm trained to use. And then I've got tourniquet, which, there's that gray area with tourniquets. Now, the medical community is starting to recognize tourniquets as a life-saving device again. For many years, they were saying no because, it can cause the loss of a limb, even when applied correctly. But it does come down to, do you want the person to lose their life or just lose a limb? Like, what would you rather? So, walking up to an accident scene and someone's leg is severed off and they're bleeding out their femoral artery, and you have seconds to get one of these tourniquets on their leg and cinched down tight enough, and you might just save their life, and maybe there's a way to get their leg reattached and they can, fully recover. Who knows? But ultimately, it's about preserving life in those seconds that count and matter. Now, another situation, this video is getting long. If you're still with me, thanks. But I'll tell another story that happened a couple years ago. My family and I were driving. We were not far from home. We were only a couple miles from home, and drove up to an intersection. And what had just happened, evidently, because everything was still smoking, a car had run a stop sign, and it plowed into the back end of another car and spun that car. And I'm going to try to tell this story as respectfully as I can, but thinking back over it, there's aspects of it that are just so humorous. These two ladies, now, I'll also preface by saying there was a racial issue, I think, with this. One was an African-American lady, one was a Caucasian lady. And they were both very large ladies. And I don't know if they knew each other. I don't know if there was something that precipitated this event, but one had clipped the other right there in the intersection. And they both got out and started screaming at each other. All right. And just two very large ladies yelling at each other. And we pull up. I've got kids in the back. We had to go through the intersection. I mean, there was another way around, but it would have taken us more miles to get around. We kind of had to go through to get to where we were going. And I saw them start arguing and yelling at each other and swinging their fists at each other. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So I called 911. Told them where the incident happened. Told them, I said, there's kind of a road rage situation going on. We need an officer on scene. And I'm watching these two ladies are just going at it. And I said, there's an altercation going on. I said this to the 911 operator. And I made a jump decision in this. I think it was the right call. I don't know why I specified this, but I told the lady, I told her my name on 911, and I said, I am a concealed carrier. I said, I'm going to try to go stop this altercation before somebody gets hurt. I said, but I'm just going to state for the record, I'm leaving my firearm in the car. And I heard the hesitation in the 911 operator. Oh, okay. And I did that. I took my gun and its holster out, and I slid it under the passenger seat. Told my wife, I said, keep watching. If you think you need to film. I said, but also try to keep the kids from seeing all this. My kids were real little then. And so I walked over, and by this time they were in the ditch rolling around with each other. And I walked up and I said, ladies, let's stop. We got police on the way. Let's stop. Let's everyone calm down. And they just completely ignored the fact that I was there. And the one lady, I won't define who, but jumped on the back of the other lady and started choking her with an armbar chokehold. And the other lady started turning a different color. And and I started getting alarmed. And I'm like, what if this lady dies right here in front of me? I just left my firearm in the car, but is this a moment to stop the firearm or use a firearm to stop this? I mean, and my adrenaline's pumping too. And one of the lady's son, little boy, gets out of the vehicle. Mom, what are you doing? I'm like, oh my goodness. And I'm like, I'm glad I left. All these thoughts going through my head. And so I don't know if I'm proud of this or not, but I started screaming. I screamed as loud as I have ever screamed before at both of them. I said, ladies, you're going to stop this right now. And I mean, that's just barely, what I was actually doing. I mean, I was doing like drill instructor level screaming. And what I ended up doing was shocking both of them. I mean, it was like they ignored me. I wasn't even there. And then all of a sudden they both just kind of, the one lady let go of the other lady. And I said, you're going to get over there and you're going to sit down. You're going to get over there and you're going to sit down and we're going to wait for the police. And the one lady tried to lunge back at the other lady and I pushed her. I did. I grabbed her by the shoulder. I said, no, you're going to go sit over there. You're not going to touch her again. You're going to go sit over there. And so they did. They separated, and the one lady then turned and looked at me. Who are you to be telling me this? Da-da-da. She tried to kill me. Da-da-da. And I said, no, we're going to wait for the police to calm down. Now she started coming after me, and I'm like, I don't like this. So I started just kind of backing away. I'm like, I'm glad I stopped her from choking the other lady, but I also don't want to get involved here. So I backed up. I think if I remember right, the 911 operator was still on the phone, or I called back and got the same operator. And I said, I've just, tried to break up the fight. They're starting to come after me now. I told the lady my name again. I said, I've got young children in the car. I don't want to witness this. I said, do I have permission to leave the scene? And she said, yes. And she said, we have your name. And I told her where we were going. We were going to a common location down the road. And I said, if there's an officer that needs to come talk to me, that's where I'll be. Please come find me. And I think you even gave her my cell phone number, even though they have it, on the 911 thing. And so we drove off, and the one lady was screaming profanity at us and chased our car as we drove to the intersection. The other lady's boyfriend showed up, and he got involved. So I don't know how that ended. I never saw anything in the news about somebody being choked to death, praise the Lord. And I waited around for a little while and didn't have a visit or a phone call from the law enforcement officer. So they had my information if they needed to know more. But I say all that to say, I'm not sorry that I got involved. I may have saved that one lady's life by getting involved, because the other lady definitely had her in a chokehold. I'm glad in the moment, and this was early on in my concealed carry years, that I chose not to take my gun over there, because I was just kind of back and forth adrenaline wise. I don't know that I needed to say that to the 911 operator. I still kind of go back and forth on that. I do kind of wish that I had this with me, just some pepper spray, simply because that lady could have gotten on top of me in a hurry. And I honestly didn't want to mess with her either. She probably had 150 pounds on me. And, I have a moral issue with fighting women. I didn't want to fight anybody. I just wanted to stop the situation. But if she would have come at me instead of, deploying some kind of potentially lethal, physical move to stop her, that could get me in trouble for assault, and what judge is going to believe a man over a woman? I don't know, and all these thoughts racing through my head. But if I would have had the pepper spray, I at least could have had a line of defense. I am glad I did remove myself from the situation when I did. So I share that to say, I do keep pepper spray. I don't keep it on me personally, but I do keep it in the front of my vehicle, especially my wife's vehicle, so she has access to it in the event of a circumstance like that. And going back to the question, should you stop? Should you engage? Got to ask the question, why? I was concerned in that moment for their safety, both of them, the drivers, and then they started fighting each other, and I'm like, this is not helping anybody, and this could get ugly. We need to stop this. So in that moment, I stepped in and tried and did the best I could to stop it. And the whole thing about yelling at them, what I ended up doing was knocking them off their what's called OODA loop. I shocked their system with how loud I was screaming and got them to let go. And, I just offered that as a tip that, sometimes surprise, it can be your greatest advantage, even if it's just, hey, get someone's attention really quick. So keep that in your arsenal. So, but back to gear, something new that I've been trying, and you may have seen this in my video where I'm backpack hunting in the mountains over vacation. I've been using this 511 bag a little bit more. Now, a couple years ago, I had an issue with fanny packs. I'm like, that's so, I guess I can't say that word. Just in my mind, fanny packs look a little effeminate, okay? Especially back in the 90s, when it was mostly women walking around with fanny packs. And so I have fanny packs, but usually I wear them like crossbody, as more like a sling bag or something. But all that to be said, there is something to having a fanny pack right here on your lap when you're driving, because, my normal carry gun is down here behind me now. I can get it out, but especially with the seatbelt buckled here, it is difficult. Now, would there be a circumstance or a situation where I need to get my gun out while seated in the vehicle? I think that circumstance is very slim. We're talking about like a mugger, carjacker. That's like the only reason why. And to that point, and I have done this before when I've driven through very sketchy environments where I am concerned about a mugger coming up to the front of my vehicle. I will usually have my gun holstered out and tucked between the seat where I can actually grab it. I have put it in the door before, but I've got to reach across my body to do that. But having it in a fanny pack, or this is the other option here. This is called a tactical bailout bag officially. It is a short little sling bag, but it can fit right here under my legs in front of the seat. And there's a lot of gear that could fit in this. And this bag does have a little Velcro spot where you can store your firearm. That's what it's designed for. So this bailout bag has been my front seat bag for a lot of trips. But then having a fanny pack on this allows you to get out of the vehicle and still have all your gear on you. So I don't know that I'm going to employ both of these at the same time. I just have them here to show you two different options. This bag has a Velcro backing, this 511 bag, to where you can put a Velcro holster on to have your gun positioned. And all you got to do is just unzip it, reach in, and you're ready to go. And in this kind of a situation, as a right-handed person, if a mugger, carjacker's, standing right here and they got the gun pointed at me and they've got their compadre standing out in front of me, okay, I'm fearing for my life. I can use deadly force. I can take one shot through the door and drive forward, would hate to have to do that, but that is a circumstance that, you do have to think about. So, as far as stopping and using a firearm, now I'm going to be very careful how I say some of this for the record's sake, but these are some thoughts that I've run through as far as, would I stop for that? And again, it's going to be very situational, and you're going to have to be very careful and pick out markers of what do I know to be true and what do I think is happening, and do I think it well enough that I can act on it? If I were to be driving down the highway and see a police officer down on the ground, my first implication is to want to stop and render aid or back up to that officer. Because in that circumstance, I believe it's clear enough the good guy is the officer and they need help. Now, all that to be said, if I have my family in the car and bullets are flying, I think my first default, unfortunately, is going to have to be I need to drive past and get them to safety, or drive on and call the police. Because I'm also not going to willingly put my family in jeopardy, especially if I'm getting out of the vehicle, walking into a hail of gunfire, and I don't know if I'm going to go down, and then, they're going to come, whoever's doing the shooting, going to come and try to use my vehicle as an escape vehicle, something like that, I don't want to put my family at risk. But, in that circumstance, you're driving down the road, you see a cop down, like, that is one of those scenarios where I would be thinking, like, I need to stop and render backup or aid to this situation. Now, driving down the road and one guy in regular clothes is shooting at another guy in regular clothes, no masks involved, there may be, different markers as far as like ethnicities and that kind of stuff, but you've got to be really careful judging a situation by ethnicities and that kind of thing. Don't just assume who the bad guy is. So that kind of circumstance, I'm probably not stopping. I'm going to keep driving and report it, especially if my family is in the vehicle. If there's not a clear marker of I believe this person to be good and that person not to be good, I'm not stopping to render aid, because that's going to insert me into a situation where I'm going to get shot at, and maybe for the wrong reasons. And even there, if I step into a situation where it's an officer down, there's going to be other officers responding. They might be on the way already. And if I'm standing there with a gun, I'm going to be considered a threat. So unless I'm on the phone saying, hey, me in the black hoodie driving the, whatever color vehicle that's just stopped, I am trying to be backup to this officer. Please don't shoot me. So unless you have that line of defense, you got to be real careful thinking about being a hero. And ultimately, that is not a reason to do any of this. You got to be laser focused on preserving life. If I stop, is it going to preserve life? If I stop, is it going to jeopardize other people's lives? That's where we got to weigh those options. Some of these things you do have to think through well in advance, because when you see something going on, your adrenaline starts to pump and you start reacting, and you're going to react based on your level of training and the thought process you've already put into the situation. And there's going to be assumptions, and you better be able to trust your assumptions. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. So again, I am not a trained law enforcement, trained EMT, trained fireman in any way. I am simply a concerned citizen with basic first aid and CPR training. So you take that for what it's worth. You need to be responsible for you and for your family primarily. When it comes to helping others in need, I think it's important to want to do this, especially as a Christian believer. We should want to help others. I keep talking about the Good Samaritan law. That comes right out of the Bible, right? The Good Samaritan is the one who stopped and rendered aid and helped. So I want to be willing to stop and help in situations, but I've also got to think of where are the priorities. A few other things I do want to point out, and this keeps happening lately. I, for some reason, keep getting flat tires in my work vehicle. Probably most of the off-roading I'm doing, I keep getting nails and screws in my tire. Hopefully that's not intentional from somebody else. But I've been going through cans of this. This is a very quick and easy for most nail flat tires. You put it in there, fill it up. And a fresh can of this will help give you enough air to, drive down the road to where you can get it repaired either by yourself or at a repair shop. And recently I had to use that to get to a flat parking lot where I could then get out my air pump and, start plugging my tire. So I also have this kit. And in my work truck, I now have this kit in the front seat instead of buried in my trunk like I used to, because I've been using it more often. And so, bare minimum, I've got tire plugs. You're probably, maybe familiar with this kind of a repair kit. There's others out there. Make sure you have a knife that you're okay getting nasty and dirty and okay with being on concrete and all that. A work knife is what I'm saying. Don't take your nice, favorite pocket knife out to fix a tire, or it will get torn up. Make sure you have a good pair. There's my leather gloves for working. And rubber cement. Make sure you got a good big tube of that, because that's what's going to hold your plug in. So again, just some considerations. This kit, parts of this kit usually stay in the door of my work vehicle, but I'm going to have this easy access on this road trip coming up. Well, this video definitely turned out a lot longer than I thought it would. Again, if you have stayed with me this far, thank you. Appreciate your support viewing this video. I hope it's valuable to you. you know, I'm starting to leave the comments open a little bit more on some of the videos, so I'll leave comments as long as people behave themselves and are polite. Oh, I glanced down here and looked. This might be a good thing to also keep. I keep this in my door. It's a disposable emergency poncho. You can pick these up in the camping section at Walmart. Having some of these, you know, we usually have an umbrella in here, but you know, responding to an accident, responding to a flat tire, trying to help keep someone who's been in an accident dry, you know, you can give them this and not feel bad about, you know, giving them your absolute best rain jacket. But, you know, you do what you have to do to help folks. So anyways, you hope for the best. I hope all this gear never has to be used, but you prepare for the worst. And you're not prepared for the worst until you kind of think through that and actually, you know, take the steps of training and acquiring the gear in order to help you. I do not like the feeling that I had recently responding to that accident of not being equipped, especially with like a fire extinguisher and with the proper cutting tool. That was not a good feeling. Now, you know, in hindsight, if I had determined, okay, these ladies cannot get out of the vehicle, I need to focus more on the fire, I could have dug out some mud and opened the hood, or tried to open the hood and tried to extinguish a fire using mud. There is some risk to that. You know, you gotta make sure you have clean mud. You're not just throwing, you know, mud and leaves onto a fire, because you could catch the leaves on fire and then you make your situation worse. So having that fire extinguisher handy would have, I wish I would have had that. So anyways, thanks. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Take care.